Dads, what's the worst thing you learned about your teen daughter? My son Peter walked in carrying a small leather journal I'd never seen before. Dad, this fell out of Sandra's backpack. Peter sat down across from me. I started reading because I thought it was homework. His face changed to extremely concerned. But then I saw her writing about a boy named Larry she'd started dating. He showed me the entries. Larry bought me flowers today. Said I was different from other girls. Said I was mature. Then Peter flipped ahead. Keep reading, Dad. The entries shifted quickly. Larry didn't like my outfit today. Said it made me look desperate. I changed before school. Then, he checks my phone now. Says it's because he loves me. Says trust means not having secrets. This gets concerning, Peter said quietly. More entries. Sandra's handwriting getting smaller. Larry saw me talking to Jake from Calc. Grabbed my wrist so hard. Says I can't have male friends anymore. My wrist still hurts, but he says I bruise too easily. I kept reading. Each entry darker than the last. He has photos of me. Says if I ever leave him, everyone will see them. Says no one would want me after that anyway. Peter pointed to a section marked with a paperclip. This is about Jess, Sandra's best friend. I turned to the marked pages. Jess has been acting strange, distant. Won't talk about why she broke up with Larry last year. Just says I should be careful. She doesn't understand he's different with me. More entries about Jess. Growing concern. Then, Jess is gone. Her mom found her this morning. There was a note. My hands stilled on the page. Mom gave me the note. Said Jess wanted me to have it. I can't stop reading it. Can't stop shaking. The next entry was just fragments, broken sentences. Jess wrote about Larry, what he did to her, the photos, the threats, the night she never told anyone. Said she couldn't live with it anymore. Said I needed to get away from him before he destroyed me too. I looked at Peter. His face was pale. There's more, he said. The entries after Jess's death were different, desperate. Tried to break up with Larry. He showed me the photos on his phone. Said Jess was weak. Said I was stronger. Said if I left him, I'd end up just like her. I missed my period. I can't tell anyone or Larry will strangle me. Positive. 3 tests. All positive. The next entries detailed Sandra's fear, her isolation, Larry's rage when she told him. He drove me to the clinic. Said it was my fault. Said I tried to trap him. Didn't speak the whole ride home. Just kept showing me those photos on his phone. Recent entries. Last week. The bruises are getting harder to hide. Long sleeves in June. Everyone asking if I'm okay. I smile. Say I'm fine. Just like Jess used to. Yesterday's entry. I understand now why Jess couldn't tell anyone. Why she felt trapped. Larry showed me new photos today. Ones I don't remember him taking. Said he has backups everywhere. Said even if something happened to him, they'd still get out. The last entry was from this morning. He knows I have Jess's note. Saw it in my room. Says if I show anyone, he'll ruin me. Says Jess was a liar anyway. Says she wanted it. Just like I do. I can't do this anymore. I need to get out. I need to… The entry cut off mid-sentence. We need to call her, I said, reaching for my phone. I tried while you were reading, Peter said. It goes straight to voicemail. I dialed Sandra's number. Nothing. Straight to voicemail. Maybe she's in class? Peter suggested. I opened the tracking app we'd installed for emergencies. Loading. Loading. Phone disconnected. Last known location. Home. 7:43 a.m. She left for school at 7:45, Peter said. Same as always. I called the school. Sandra hadn't shown up for first period, or second, or any class after. Try her friends, I told Peter. He called while I searched Sandra's room. Her laptop was gone. Some clothes missing. Jess's note nowhere to be found. No one's seen her, Peter reported. But Amy said Larry wasn't at school either. I called Larry's number. Disconnected. Called his parents. No answer. Dad, Peter said, pointing out the window. Mom's home. My ex-wife's car pulled into the driveway. Her face was destroyed. Makeup streaked. Eyes swollen. What happened? I asked. She looked at me. The hospital just called. The police are there. It's Sandra. Her boyfriend did something terrible to her. I grabbed my keys off the counter. Peter was already heading for the door. Natalie stood in the entryway. Makeup streaked down her face, hands shaking. I pushed past her toward my car. Peter climbed into the passenger seat. I started the engine before my door was fully closed. Natalie's car pulled out behind us as I backed down the driveway. My hands wouldn't stop shaking on the steering wheel. The journal sat in Peter's lap. He kept checking his phone. His screen lit up his face in the dim car. No new messages, no updates. His face looked wrong, too pale, too scared. I'd never seen him look like that before. I ran a red light, didn't even see it until we were through the intersection. Peter didn't say anything, just kept staring at his phone, willing it to ring. The hospital was 20 minutes away. I made it in 12. My brain kept trying to process what something terrible meant. The journal entries flashed through my mind. The bruises, the threats, the photos, Jess's suicide. I gripped the steering wheel harder. My knuckles turned white. Peter's phone stayed dark and silent. The emergency room doors slid open, bright lights, antiseptic smell. A triage nurse looked up from her computer. I couldn't remember Sandra's birthday for a second. My mind went completely blank. Peter gave the information. The nurse typed slowly. She said Sandra was stable, currently undergoing examination. We needed to wait for the doctor. She pointed toward a waiting area. Natalie burst through the doors behind us. Her voice came out too loud. She demanded to see Sandra immediately. The nurse repeated that we had to wait. Natalie's voice got louder. She needed to see her daughter right now. 2 security guards appeared from somewhere. One of them asked us to please stay calm. Natalie started crying, real sobbing that made her whole body shake. I guided her to a chair in the waiting area. She collapsed into it. Peter sat down next to her. I couldn't sit. I paced back and forth in front of the chairs. Other people in the waiting room stared at us. I didn't care. A doctor came through the double doors after what felt like hours, probably 15 minutes. He wore blue scrubs with some kind of stain on the sleeve. He asked if we were Sandra's family. His voice was calm, professional, clinical. He explained that Sandra had injuries consistent with physical assault, bruising on her face and arms, a sprained wrist, some other injuries he didn't specify. She was examined by a SANE nurse, sexual assault nurse examiner, for evidence collection. The words didn't make sense at first. Then they did. Natalie made a sound I'd never heard before, a kind of broken wail. She pressed her hands over her mouth. I felt my legs go weak, actually weak, like they might not hold me up. I grabbed the back of a chair. The doctor kept talking. Sandra was stable. No life-threatening injuries. She'd need x-rays, maybe a CT scan. They were being thorough. I nodded like I understood. I didn't understand anything. A man in a dark suit approached us. He had a badge clipped to his belt. Detective Reese Horton. He introduced himself calmly, asked if we could speak privately about Sandra's situation. We followed him to a small consultation room off the main waiting area. 4 chairs around a small table, harsh fluorescent lighting. Horton sat down and gestured for us to do the same. He explained that the hospital called police when Sandra's injuries indicated assault, standard protocol for suspected domestic violence. He needed our cooperation to build a case. His voice stayed level and professional the whole time. Not cold exactly, just controlled, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. He probably had. He took out a notepad, asked for basic information about Sandra, age, address, school. Then he asked about her boyfriend. I realized I was about to hand over the journal, the evidence of everything I'd missed. I pulled the journal from Peter's hands, explained how Peter found it this morning. Fell out of Sandra's backpack. Horton took it carefully, like it was fragile. He started reading. His expression changed as he flipped through pages. Got darker, harder. He asked permission to photograph the pages as evidence. Needed written consent. A nurse brought a consent form. My hands shook so badly I could barely sign my name. The pen kept slipping. Natalie read over Horton's shoulder. She made small, gasping sounds as she read different entries. About the flowers, the isolation, the threats, the photos. Horton took out his phone. Started photographing each page methodically. The flash kept going off. Bright bursts of light in the small room. Each flash felt like it was burning the words into my brain permanently. Horton's jaw tightened when he got to the entries about Jess. He read those pages twice, photographed them from multiple angles. Horton started asking detailed questions about Larry. Full legal name. I didn't know it. Home address. I knew the street, but not the house number. School schedule. No idea. Vehicle description. I'd seen him drive a dark sedan once. Maybe blue, maybe black. Known associates. Friends at the school. I couldn't name a single one. Horton wrote down each "I don't know" in his notepad. The shame hit me like a physical thing. My daughter had been dating this person for months, living under my roof, and I couldn't answer basic questions about him. I didn't know where he lived, what he drove, who his friends were, what his last name was. Natalie knew his last name. She'd met his parents once at a school event. That made it worse somehow. My ex-wife knew more about Sandra's boyfriend than I did. Peter offered what he could. Larry was a senior, played basketball, had an older brother in college. It wasn't much. It was more than I had. A woman in business casual clothes knocked on the door. Kylie Swanson, hospital social worker. She sat down across from us. Her voice was gentle but direct. Sandra was physically stable. The examination was complete, but she was emotionally fragile. Very fragile. She was asking not to see anyone yet. Needed time to process what happened, to feel safe before family visits. Natalie's face crumpled. She asked why Sandra didn't want to see her mother. Kylie explained trauma responses. How victims often feel shame, fear, confusion about who to trust. It wasn't rejection. It was self-protection. Sandra needed to feel in control of something, even if that something was just who visited her hospital room. Natalie started crying again, softer this time. Kylie waited patiently, let her cry, then explained that we could have a brief visit. Very brief. But we needed to follow Sandra's lead, let her set the boundaries. No pressure, no demands, just presence. The nurse led us to Sandra's room, third floor, end of a long hallway. She lay in the hospital bed staring at the wall. Her face was bruised, purple and yellow marks across her cheekbone. Her left wrist was wrapped in a brace. She didn't turn her head when we walked in, didn't acknowledge us at all. Natalie moved toward the bed, arms outstretched to hug her. Sandra flinched. Her whole body jerked away. The movement was violent, instinctive. The monitors next to her bed started beeping, loud alarms. A nurse rushed in, checked the monitors, looked at Sandra, asked if she was okay. Sandra nodded but still wouldn't look at any of us. The nurse adjusted something on the monitors. The beeping stopped. She gave us a look, a warning, then left. We stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do. Sandra kept staring at the wall. Peter said her name softly. She didn't respond. We stayed for maybe 5 minutes. It felt like an hour. Then Kylie appeared in the doorway. Time to go. Back in the waiting room, Natalie turned on me. Her voice was low but sharp. How did I not see this happening? Under my roof, in my house. Sandra lived with me full time. How did I miss every single sign? I wanted to defend myself. Wanted to explain that teenage girls are moody. That I thought she was just being a teenager. That I was busy with work. But the excuses died in my throat. Because she was right. Sandra lived with me. Ate breakfast at my table. Did homework in my living room. Wore long sleeves in June. Lost weight. Stopped seeing friends. And I noticed all of it. I just assumed it was normal. Assumed it was teenage drama. Focused on my own life, my own problems. Told myself she'd talk to me if something was really wrong. I had no defense, no excuse. I'd failed her. Completely and totally failed her. Natalie's anger was justified. I accepted it. Deserved it. Peter pulled me aside while Natalie talked to Kylie. He showed me his phone. More photos of journal entries. He'd taken pictures before giving me the journal. Smart kid. These entries were different, more detailed. About the photos Larry took. Specific threats he made, how he'd release them if she ever left, if she ever told anyone, how no one would want her after, how she'd be ruined. There were entries about Jess's suicide note, what it said, what Jess had written about Larry, about what he'd done to her, the same pattern, the same threats, the same photos. Jess had tried to warn Sandra, had literally died trying to warn her, and Sandra got the warning, read it, understood it, but couldn't escape. The connection clicked into horrible focus. This wasn't Sandra's first warning. Jess had paid with her life to send that warning, and it hadn't been enough. Larry was still here, still hurting people, still destroying lives, and I'd let Sandra walk right into it. Detective Horton came back through the waiting room doors about 20 minutes later. His face looked tired. He pulled up a chair across from Peter and me. Natalie walked over from where she'd been pacing near the windows. Horton opened his notebook and flipped through a few pages before looking up at us. Larry hadn't been home since yesterday morning. His phone was disconnected, same as Sandra's. Horton had gone to Larry's house personally, talked to his parents. They claimed they had no idea where their son was, said he left for school yesterday and never came home, but Horton didn't buy it. He said parents who are genuinely worried about a missing kid act different. They panic. They call everyone. Larry's parents were calm, too calm, gave short answers, wouldn't let him inside without a warrant. Horton was working on getting warrants for Larry's devices and online accounts, but that took time. Paperwork, judges, legal process. He told us to be patient. Peter asked how long. Horton said maybe a few days for the warrants to come through, then more time to actually search the accounts. I felt my chest get tight. Days meant Larry was out there somewhere, free, knowing we had the journal, knowing Sandra was here. Kylie appeared next to us. She had a clipboard, and her expression was serious but kind. She asked if we could talk privately for a minute. Natalie and I followed her to a small room off the waiting area. Peter stayed behind with his phone. Kylie sat down and explained the hospital's protocol for cases like Sandra's, domestic violence cases. She needed to ask some specific questions. Had Sandra mentioned anything about pregnancy? About sexual assault details? I felt sick. I had to tell her, had to share what the journal said. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos Peter had taken of the entries, the ones about missing her period, the positive pregnancy tests. 3 of them. The forced trip to the clinic, Larry's rage, the threats with the photos during the whole drive. Kylie's face got tight as she read. Professional tight, like she was trying not to show how bad this was, but I could see it in her eyes. This was worse than she'd expected. She made notes on her clipboard, asked if I knew which clinic. I didn't. She said they'd try to track down the records. That documentation could be important. Back in the waiting room, Natalie started in on me again. We needed to file for an emergency protective order. Right now. Today. She was practically yelling. People in the waiting room were staring. I tried to keep my voice down. I told her we should wait. Let Sandra have a say in the decision. She was barely holding together. We couldn't just make huge legal moves without her input. Natalie's face went red. She said Sandra was a minor. We were her parents. We made the decisions to keep her safe. I said overwhelming her right now could make things worse. She called me ridiculous. Said I was more worried about paperwork than our daughter's safety. I felt my own anger rising. Started to snap back. Then Kylie stepped between us. Her voice was calm but firm. She said we both wanted what was best for Sandra, but we needed to work together. Fighting wasn't helping anyone, especially not Sandra, who could probably hear us from her room. That shut us both up. Natalie walked away. I sat down hard in one of the plastic chairs. Detective Horton came over and asked if I had time to give a formal statement about finding the journal, about Sandra's behavior over the past few months, anything Peter and I had observed. We went to another small room, just him and me, a recorder on the table between us. He asked me to start from the beginning. When did I first notice changes in Sandra? I described everything. The long sleeves in June, how she used to wear tank tops and shorts all summer. Suddenly it was hoodies and jeans even when it was hot out. The weight loss. She'd always been thin, but she got thinner. Stopped eating much at dinner. Said she wasn't hungry. The isolation from friends. Sandra used to have friends over all the time. Movie nights, study groups. That stopped. She stayed in her room, on her phone constantly, or doing homework. I'd thought it was normal teenage stuff. Girls go through phases, get moody, focus on boyfriends. I'd told myself she was just growing up, being a teenager. But now listing it all out for Detective Horton, I heard how stupid it sounded. How obvious the signs were. My voice cracked when I got to the part about the long sleeves. How I'd asked her once if she was hot. She'd said no, and I'd just accepted it. Never pushed. Never looked closer. Horton didn't judge. Just kept taking notes. Asked good questions. Specific details about times and dates. A nurse knocked on the door. Said Sandra was asking for someone. We both stood up fast. But the nurse said Sandra was asking for Peter. Not me. Not Natalie. Just Peter. I tried not to let that hurt show on my face. Told the nurse I'd send him in. Peter went down the hallway with the nurse. Natalie and I waited outside Sandra's room. We didn't talk. Just stood there in the hallway. Other nurses walked past. A doctor. Someone pushing a food cart. The hospital sounds were too loud. Beeping machines. Distant voices. Footsteps on tile floors. After 20 minutes, Peter came out. His eyes were red. He'd been crying. He pulled us away from Sandra's door, down the hall where she couldn't hear. Peter's voice was shaky. Sandra had told him she was scared, not of Larry coming back, but of the photos getting out, of everyone seeing them, of her life being over. She'd made Peter promise, made him swear he wouldn't let anyone see the photos, that he'd find them and delete them somehow. Peter looked at me, said he'd promised because she was so upset, but he knew it was impossible. If Larry had uploaded them anywhere, if they were in cloud storage or on other devices, they could be anywhere, could already be online, and Peter couldn't protect her from that. He started crying again. I put my hand on his shoulder, didn't know what else to do. Kylie came down the hallway looking for us. She said Sandra had agreed to talk to her, about safety planning, about what happens next. Kylie explained confidentiality limits, what she was required to report, what stayed private. She also explained the SANE examination, sexual assault nurse examiner, how they'd collect evidence, document injuries. It was Sandra's choice whether to do it. No pressure. Kylie was gone for almost an hour. When she came back, she told us Sandra had consented to the full examination, the evidence collection, everything. Detective Horton said that was good, really good. It would strengthen the criminal case significantly. Physical evidence plus Sandra's statement plus the journal, that was solid. Horton asked to talk to me again. More questions, this time about Larry specifically, his patterns, his relationship with Sandra, any interactions I'd witnessed. I felt stupid answering. I'd met Larry maybe 3 times. He'd come to pick Sandra up for dates, came to the door, shook my hand, said yes, sir, called me Mr. Novak. Polite, well-spoken, clean-cut, the kind of kid who looked parents in the eye. I'd thought he was a good kid, a good boyfriend for Sandra. I'd been relieved she was dating someone respectful, someone who seemed mature. Now I realized that's exactly what he'd wanted me to think. He'd played the role perfectly, said all the right things, acted like the perfect boyfriend in front of adults, and I'd fallen for it completely. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but everything was so messed up I figured it might be important. It was Isaiah Ingram, the school counselor. He was calling about Sandra's absence, asking if everything was okay. His voice sounded concerned. I didn't know how much to tell him. Kept it general. Said Sandra was dealing with a personal situation, that she wouldn't be at the school for a while. Isaiah went quiet for a second. Then he said he'd noticed Sandra seemed withdrawn lately, the past few months. She'd seemed sad, distant, but when he'd asked if she wanted to talk, she'd insisted she was fine, just stressed about grades. He said he should have pushed harder, should have dug deeper. I told him it wasn't his fault. None of us saw it. By evening, Kylie had worked her social work magic. She'd contacted Jess's mom through some network of counselors and advocates, got permission to share a copy of Jess's suicide note with Detective Horton for the investigation. Kylie brought me a photocopy, asked if I wanted to read it again before giving it to Horton. I did. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to understand what Sandra had been living with, what Jess had tried to warn her about. The note was written in shaky handwriting. Jess had been 16 when she died. The note talked about Larry, about how he'd seemed so nice at first, so caring, then how he'd changed, become controlling, mean, how he'd taken photos of her, private photos, threatened to show everyone if she ever left him, or told anyone what he'd done. The note described things Larry had done to her, things she couldn't live with anymore, things she couldn't tell her parents or friends because she was so ashamed. The note ended with a warning to Sandra, begging her to get away from Larry before he destroyed her too. I handed the copy to Detective Horton, watched him read it. His jaw got tight. He asked if he could keep it. I said yes. Reading it again made me physically sick. Jess had tried to warn Sandra, had literally died trying to save her, and it hadn't been enough. Detective Horton stepped into the hallway to make calls. I watched him through the window. He was on the phone for maybe 10 minutes. When he came back, his face looked tight. He told me Larry's parents refused to come to the station. Their lawyer had called and said they were invoking their Fifth Amendment rights. Horton sat down across from me. He explained that when parents lawyer up this fast, it usually means they know something. They're protecting their son. The words made my blood boil. These people knew what Larry had done. Maybe they knew where he was right now, and they were choosing to protect him instead of helping Sandra. Horton said he'd keep trying, but without cooperation, it would be harder to find Larry quickly. Kylie came back from Sandra's room. She asked to speak with Horton privately. They went down the hall. I sat there feeling useless. Natalie paced near the vending machines. Peter scrolled through his phone with shaking hands. 20 minutes passed. Kylie and Horton returned together. Kylie explained that Sandra had given a brief statement to the SANE nurse. She'd talked about being coerced and threatened, but she refused to provide explicit details about the assault itself. Kylie's voice was gentle. She told us this was normal. Trauma memories are fragmented. The brain protects itself by blocking out the worst parts. Pushing too hard too soon can re-traumatize victims. It can actually harm the case because forced memories aren't reliable. Horton nodded. He said Sandra's brief statement was still helpful. Combined with her physical injuries and the journal, it painted a clear picture. Peter suddenly looked up from his phone. He pulled me aside, showed me his screen. Natalie finally backed down, but I could see she wasn't happy about it. Could see the frustration in her clenched jaw, the way she turned away from both of us. We were all exhausted, all running on fear and anger and too much coffee. The day stretched on. Evening came. We took turns sitting with Peter in Sandra's room when she allowed it. She still wouldn't see me or Natalie, but she let Peter stay. Let him read to her. Let him just sit quietly while she stared at the wall. It was something. Small progress, but progress. The next evening, Peter was in his room when his phone buzzed. I was downstairs making coffee when I heard him yell for me. His voice had panic in it. I took the stairs 2 at a time. He was sitting on his bed staring at his phone with his face completely white. His hands were shaking, so hard the phone was vibrating. I sat down next to him, and he turned the screen toward me. A direct message on Instagram from an account called user7392847. No profile picture, no posts, just the message. Tell your dad to back off or everyone sees everything. Peter's breathing was fast and shallow. He kept saying he was sorry, kept saying he made things worse. I took the phone and screenshot the message, sent it to Detective Horton immediately. Then I put my arm around Peter and told him this wasn't his fault. Told him whoever sent this was scared. Scared people make threats. But my own hands were shaking too. Detective Horton called back within 10 minutes. Said to bring the phone to the station first thing tomorrow morning. Said not to respond to the message, not to block the account. Just leave everything exactly as it was. Peter barely slept that night. I heard him pacing in his room until after 2 in the morning. The next morning, we met Detective Horton at the station. He had a specialist with him. Woman in her 30s with glasses and a laptop bag. She introduced herself as the digital forensics specialist. Took Peter's phone and connected it to her laptop. Started running programs I didn't understand. Horton explained that even burner accounts leave traces. IP addresses, device fingerprints, metadata. The specialist said threatening a witness was a separate crime, could add charges to whoever sent it, whether that was Larry or someone helping him. She worked for about an hour while we waited in Horton's office. Peter kept apologizing. I kept telling him to stop. Finally, the specialist came back. Said she had the data she needed. Said the account was created yesterday from a phone that pinged off towers near Larry's neighborhood. Said she could track down more details, but it would take a few days. Horton thanked her, and she left. Then he turned to us and said this message actually helped the case. showed Larry or his associates were actively threatening witnesses, showed consciousness of guilt, made it harder for any defense attorney to claim this was all a misunderstanding. Later that afternoon, Horton called to say Sandra had agreed to give a preliminary statement. Vanessa Bolton would be there for support. Natalie and I drove to the Victim Advocacy Center where they were meeting. We waited in a different room, couldn't hear anything, just sat there for 2 hours checking our phones and drinking bad coffee from a machine in the hallway. When the door finally opened, Sandra looked destroyed. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her voice was hoarse. Vanessa walked her out to Natalie's car while Horton stayed behind to talk to us. He said Sandra had provided detailed information about the coercion, about the threats, about the assault, said it was enough to support multiple felony charges, said she did better than most victims do in their first formal statement, said he knew it cost her everything to sit in that room and describe what happened. We drove Sandra back to the safe house where she was staying. She didn't want to talk, just stared out the window the whole drive. The next morning, Horton called with news about Isaiah's tip line. A girl named Hannah had called in, said Larry used the same pattern on her freshman year, isolated her from friends, checked her phone constantly, threatened her when she tried to break up with him. She was willing to make a formal statement. Horton said this was huge, said it established a pattern of behavior, said defense attorneys couldn't claim Sandra was making things up or exaggerating if other victims reported the same tactics, said pattern evidence significantly strengthened the case. That afternoon, we met with Dylan Craig at his office. He had Sandra's statement, had the threatening message to Peter, had Hannah's preliminary information. He said we needed to file for an emergency protective order immediately, said we had enough evidence now to justify it, said waiting any longer put Sandra at unnecessary risk. Natalie and I finally agreed. For the first time since this started, we were on the same page about something. We spent 3 hours filling out paperwork, describing Larry's threats, describing Sandra's fear, describing why she needed legal protection. My hand cramped from writing, but I kept going. Every detail mattered. Every specific threat needed to be documented. Meanwhile, Detective Horton was dealing with another problem. Larry's parents had left town suddenly, claimed a family emergency, refused to say where they were going, refused to answer questions. Their lawyer called Horton and said they were invoking their rights and wouldn't be making any statements. Horton told me this usually meant one of two things. Either they were helping Larry hide, or they were scared of what he might do. Either way, their evasiveness made them uncooperative witnesses. He filed a report flagging them, said if they were helping Larry evade arrest, they could face charges themselves. At the school, Isaiah was working with the principal on a safety plan for Sandra's eventual return. He called to walk me through it. Options for remote classes, schedule modifications so she wouldn't have to be in the same building sections as Larry's friends, staff training on what protective orders meant and how to enforce them. He went through every detail, every precaution, every accommodation. The more he talked, the more I realized Sandra's trauma wasn't something that would just heal and disappear. This was permanent. This would affect her for years. The planning made it real in a way that hurt to acknowledge. 2 days later, the forensic specialist called Horton with results. She had traced the threatening message. The burner account was accessed from a prepaid phone. Phone was purchased at a convenience store near Larry's neighborhood. She pulled security footage from the store, showed a guy matching the description of Larry's best friend buying the phone with cash 3 days before the message was sent. Horton said this gave them a new lead, said they could bring in Larry's friend for questioning, said threatening a witness could get him charged too, said scared friends sometimes flip and provide information to save themselves. That same day, Sandra was talking with Vanessa when she suddenly remembered something. Larry had mentioned a storage unit once, said he kept important stuff there, stuff his parents couldn't find. She wasn't sure of the exact location, but she remembered the name had safe in it. Vanessa called Horton immediately. He started checking storage facilities in the area, found 3 with safe in the name: Safe Keep Storage, Safe Haven Storage, Safeguard Storage. Started working on getting warrants for all 3. By evening, he had narrowed it down, found that Larry's father had rented a unit at Safe Keep Storage 2 years ago. Unit was still active, still being paid for monthly. Horton got a warrant approved by a judge. Search was scheduled for the next morning. He called to tell me, said they would execute the warrant at 8, said he would call with results as soon as the search was complete. I tried to sleep that night but couldn't. Kept thinking about what they might find, kept thinking about whether it would be enough, kept replaying Sandra's journal entries in my head, the photos, the threats, the backups Larry claimed to have everywhere. What if they found nothing? What if Larry had already moved everything? What if this was another dead end? I watched the clock. 3 in the morning, 4, 5, finally gave up and made coffee. Sat at the kitchen table waiting for sunrise, waiting for Horton's call, waiting to find out if we were any closer to stopping Larry or if he was still out there with all his insurance, still holding all the power, still controlling Sandra's life, even from wherever he was hiding. Horton called at 8:30 that morning. The storage unit search had finished. They recovered 2 laptops, 3 external hard drives, and a cardboard box filled with printed photos. He told me the forensics team sealed everything as evidence immediately. The laptops appeared to contain files matching descriptions from Sandra's journal entries. The hard drives held additional backups. The printed photos were the worst part. Physical copies meant Larry had been methodical about his blackmail operation. Horton explained that forensics would need days or possibly weeks to examine everything properly. There might be additional backups stored elsewhere. Cloud services, other devices, hidden locations they hadn't discovered yet. The uncertainty made my stomach hurt. I called Natalie to update her. She went quiet when I mentioned the printed photos. Then she asked if Sandra would have to see them. I didn't have an answer. Vanessa called an hour later about the protective order hearing. The court had scheduled it for 3 days from now. She wanted to meet with Natalie and me to prepare our statements. We needed to explain clearly why Sandra required legal protection from Larry, what specific threats he had made, what patterns of behavior demonstrated danger. Vanessa's office was downtown in a building that smelled like coffee and old carpet. She sat us down with folders of paperwork, explained what the judge would want to hear, focused testimony about concrete incidents rather than general fear. Natalie and I took turns practicing what we would say, describing the journal entries, the bruises, the isolation, Sandra's terror. For the first time since this nightmare started, we worked together instead of fighting. Natalie corrected details I got wrong. I filled in gaps she missed. We built a complete picture between us. Vanessa nodded approval, told us this cooperation would help Sandra more than anything else we could do. The next morning, Horton called with forensics results. The seized devices definitely contained backups of photos and videos. Worse, they found evidence of uploads to a third-party cloud service, some company overseas with encrypted storage. Horton started the subpoena process to access those accounts and force deletion of the files. He warned me the legal process could take weeks, maybe months if the company fought the order. Meanwhile, those files sat somewhere online, accessible, potentially shareable. The knowledge made me feel sick every time I thought about it. Kylie cornered me at the hospital that afternoon, asked when I had last eaten a full meal, when I had last slept more than 3 hours, pointed out that I was snapping at nurses and barely holding conversations. She said I needed to take care of myself, or I would be useless to Sandra. The words stung because they were true. I scheduled an appointment with a therapist for the following week. The admission that I needed help felt like another failure. Another way I had let my family down. Peter found me sitting in my car afterward, asked what was wrong. I told him about the therapy appointment, expected judgment. Instead, he said he was proud of me for trying. That simple statement from my son broke something inside me. I cried for the first time since reading Sandra's journal. Just sat there in the driver's seat with tears running down my face while Peter squeezed my shoulder. Sandra got medically cleared for discharge 2 days later. The doctors said her physical injuries had healed enough, but Horton still hadn't located Larry. Home wasn't safe. Vanessa made calls to domestic violence organizations, found a confidential safe location that could take Sandra immediately. A house in an undisclosed neighborhood run by trained staff. Sandra agreed because she was desperate to leave the hospital, hated the sterile room and constant monitoring. Natalie wanted Sandra to stay with her instead, argued that family was safer than strangers. But Vanessa explained that Larry knew Natalie's address, knew her routine. The safe house location was completely confidential. Even we wouldn't know exactly where it was. Just a phone number to call. Sandra moved there on a Tuesday. We said goodbye in the hospital parking lot. She looked so small carrying her bag of belongings. Wouldn't make eye contact with any of us. Just got in the van with the advocate and drove away. The protective order hearing happened Thursday morning. Natalie, Peter, and I all testified. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Just a judge, a court reporter, and a few staff members. The judge asked questions about Larry's behavior, his threats, the journal entries, the assault. We took turns answering, providing specific examples, dates, and details. The judge listened carefully, took notes, then granted a temporary protective order. Larry was prohibited from contacting Sandra, from coming within 500 feet of her, of our homes, of her school. The order would last until a full hearing could be scheduled. Horton warned us afterward that paper orders don't stop determined abusers. The order was a legal tool, but not a physical barrier. We needed to stay alert. Friday afternoon, Horton called with news. Larry had been arrested. A patrol officer 2 towns over recognized him from a police bulletin, found him at his cousin's apartment. Larry was in custody now, charged with assault, sexual coercion, and violating the protective order. Apparently, he had tried to contact Sandra through his friend the day before, sent a message saying she better not testify. The friend had reported it. That contact violated the order even though it was issued after the fact. Added another charge to the list. I felt relief wash through me. Larry was in custody, behind bars, unable to hurt Sandra or threaten anyone. Dylan Craig called that evening. His voice was cautious. Larry's family had hired an expensive defense attorney, someone from a big firm downtown. The attorney was already arguing for reasonable bail, claiming the charges were exaggerated, that Larry was a good student with no prior record, that he wasn't a flight risk. Dylan said the bail hearing was scheduled for Monday. There was a real possibility Larry could be released within days. When I told Sandra this news through Vanessa, she panicked, started hyperventilating. Vanessa had to walk her through breathing exercises over the phone. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out, over and over until Sandra could speak again. The fear in her voice made me want to break something. Isaiah called about Sandra's return to the school. He had been working with the principal on a modified schedule. Sandra would attend morning classes only, in a separate building section where Larry's friends didn't have access. She would check in with Isaiah daily, have a dedicated safe space to retreat to if needed. Teachers were being briefed on the situation without details, just enough to understand Sandra needed support and accommodation. Isaiah explained this would give her structure while maintaining safety boundaries, a way to reclaim normal life in controlled increments. Sandra would start the following Monday if she felt ready. Everything was happening so fast. The storage unit evidence, the protective order, Larry's arrest, the bail hearing, school planning. Each day brought new developments, new crises, new decisions to make. I kept thinking about those cloud backups, files sitting on servers somewhere, evidence that could convict Larry but also could destroy Sandra if they got out. The legal process grinding forward while we all held our breath, waiting to see if the system would protect her or fail her the way it had failed Jess. The next morning, Horton called to explain the digital forensics process. The tech team had identified 17 different platforms where parts of Sandra's images had been uploaded. They were filing DMCA takedown notices for each one and getting court orders to force compliance. Horton walked me through the timeline. Each platform had different response procedures. Some would act within days, others took weeks, and even after removal, files could be re-uploaded from other sources. The team was documenting every location, every upload date, every associated account, building a map of distribution for the criminal case. I asked if the images would ever be completely gone. Horton paused before answering. He said they were doing everything possible, but realistically some files might persist in dark corners of the internet forever. The goal was to remove them from accessible platforms and prosecute anyone who tried to share them. When I told Sandra this through Vanessa, she went quiet for a long time, then asked if that meant she would never be safe from them. Vanessa helped her understand that legal protection and documentation mattered, even if total erasure was impossible. The work continued, whether or not it could be perfect. 2 days later, Natalie and I sat in Kylie's office for what she called a co-parenting protocol meeting. The room was small and professional, neutral colors, a box of tissues on the table. Kylie had printed out a crisis communication plan template. She explained that Sandra's recovery would involve ongoing decisions about therapy, school, legal proceedings, and safety. Natalie and I needed a system for making those decisions together despite our history. Kylie suggested a shared app where we could post updates and questions, a rule that we consult each other before any major decision about Sandra's care, and keeping Peter informed since Sandra trusted him most right now. Natalie agreed immediately. I felt defensive at first, like this was another system to manage my failures, but Kylie pointed out that structure actually reduced conflict by creating clear expectations. We spent an hour setting up the app and defining what counted as a major decision. Medical appointments, therapy changes, school schedule modifications, legal strategy discussions. Natalie typed quickly, her jaw set. I watched her add categories and realized she was scared too. Scared of making the wrong choice. Scared of Sandra getting hurt again because we missed something. When we finished, Kylie asked us each to say one thing we appreciated about the other's parenting. Natalie looked at me and said I had been present every day since the hospital. That mattered to Sandra even if she couldn't say it yet. I told Natalie she had fought harder than anyone to keep Sandra safe. The structure helped, not because it fixed our relationship, but because it gave us a way to work together without having to resolve everything else first. Sandra's first meeting with Isaiah happened on a Wednesday morning before other students arrived. I drove her to the school and walked her to the counseling office. She was pale and quiet, wearing a hoodie despite the warm weather. Isaiah met us at the door and thanked me for bringing her, then asked if Sandra wanted me to stay or wait outside. She chose outside. I sat in the hallway for 45 minutes watching students arrive. Lockers slamming, voices echoing, normal high school chaos that felt alien now. When the door opened, Sandra's face looked less tight. Isaiah explained they had worked out a plan for her coursework. Sandra was behind in 3 classes, English, Calc, and Biology, but her teachers had agreed to modified assignments she could complete at her own pace. shorter essays, problem sets instead of tests, lab reports from home experiments. Isaiah had also arranged for her to take morning classes only in a separate building section, a schedule that avoided Larry's friends and gave her an escape route if needed. Sandra would check in with Isaiah every day, use his office as a safe space. He had cleared it with the principal and her teachers. Having concrete academic goals seemed to help Sandra feel less like her entire life was destroyed. She asked Isaiah about graduation requirements, whether she could still finish on time. He said yes if she stayed on track with the modified plan. On the drive home, she was quiet, but not shut down. When I asked if the plan felt manageable, she nodded, then said it was weird, but good to think about homework again. Like maybe some parts of normal life could still exist. Thursday night, Peter and I attended a support group for families of assault survivors. Kylie had recommended it weeks ago, but I kept finding excuses not to go. Peter finally said we should try it together. The meeting was in a church basement, folding chairs in a circle, coffee and cookies on a side table. 8 other people there, parents mostly, 1 older sister. The facilitator introduced us and explained the group rules. Confidentiality, no advice giving, just sharing and listening. We went around the circle, each person talking about their situation. A father whose daughter was assaulted at college, a mother whose son was abused by a coach. Stories that made my chest hurt. When it was my turn, I talked about finding Sandra's journal, the hospital, the ongoing investigation, how I kept thinking about all the signs I missed. A father across the circle nodded. He said he had the same guilt, kept replaying moments where he could have asked better questions, paid closer attention, done something different. But his therapist helped him understand that abusers are skilled at hiding their behavior, that parental guilt was natural, but not the same as parental responsibility for the abuse itself. Another parent talked about the difference between supporting recovery and trying to fix everything. She said her instinct was to solve every problem, but her daughter needed her to just be present instead, to listen without immediately jumping to solutions. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Afterward, Peter and I sat in the car for a while. He asked if it helped. I said yes, not because it made anything better, but because hearing other parents describe similar feelings made me realize I was not uniquely terrible, that the guilt and helplessness were normal responses to an abnormal situation. One father had said something that stuck with me. Focus on present support rather than past failures. I thought about that driving home, thought about how I could not change what I missed, but I could show up now, every day, however Sandra needed. The preliminary hearing happened 3 weeks after Sandra's hospitalization. She testified via video link from the courthouse victim services room, a small private space with a camera and monitor. Vanessa sat with her. I watched from the courtroom gallery with Natalie and Peter. The judge was a woman in her 50s, efficient and serious. Dylan Craig presented evidence systematically, photos from the storage unit, Sandra's medical records showing injuries consistent with assault, witness statements from Amy and Hannah about Larry's pattern of behavior, the SANE examination results, journal entries, Jess's suicide note, each piece of evidence documented and entered into the record. When Sandra appeared on the monitor, she looked small and scared. The judge asked if she was ready to proceed. Sandra nodded. Dylan asked her questions carefully, establishing timeline, confirming the journal was hers, describing Larry's threats and control. Sandra's voice was quiet, but steady. She did not go into graphic detail, just confirmed key facts, that Larry had photographed her without full consent, that he threatened to release the images if she left, that he assaulted her when she tried to end the relationship. The defense attorney asked a few questions, trying to suggest Sandra had wanted the relationship, that the photos were consensual, but Sandra held firm, said she felt trapped and scared, that Larry used the photos as weapons. The judge listened carefully, took notes. After 90 minutes of testimony and evidence, she made her ruling. Probable cause existed to proceed with felony charges, aggravated assault, sexual coercion, criminal invasion of privacy. Larry would face trial. The judge set a trial date for 4 months out. Natalie grabbed my hand when the ruling came down. Peter let out a breath. Sandra's face on the monitor showed something like relief mixed with exhaustion. It was not over, but it was moving forward. The security system installation happened over 2 days. A company that specialized in domestic violence safety came to my house. They installed cameras covering all entry points, motion sensors on doors and windows, direct notification to the police department if an alarm triggered. We changed all the locks, added deadbolts, put privacy film on Sandra's bedroom windows so no one could see in from outside. The technician explained each component patiently, showed me how to arm and disarm the system, how to check camera feeds from my phone, how to test the panic buttons we installed in Sandra's room and the main hallway. The practical steps of making the house physically safer helped me feel less helpless, like I was doing something concrete to protect her. When Sandra came home that weekend for a trial visit, I walked her through everything, Showed her the cameras, the locks, the panic buttons. She tested the system herself, armed it, disarmed it, checked the camera angles. Then she said, knowing about the cameras made her feel less exposed. Not safe exactly, but less vulnerable. Like there was evidence now if anything happened. A record that could not be erased or denied. She slept in her room that night for the first time since the hospital. I checked the camera feeds twice before going to bed, watched her light turn off. The house settled into quiet. Peter knocked on my door around midnight, asked if I was okay. I said I was just making sure the system worked. He sat with me for a while, both of us watching the monitor, making sure Sandra was safe, making sure the house stayed secure. Finally, Peter said she was okay for tonight, that I needed to sleep too. I turned off the monitor and tried. 3 weeks after Sandra's hospitalization, we had a quiet family dinner. Just Peter, Sandra, Natalie, and me. I cooked pasta. Nothing fancy, just something everyone could eat. Sandra came to the table slowly, sat in her usual chair. Natalie brought salad. Peter set out plates. We passed dishes around in careful silence. The conversation was awkward and careful. Natalie asked about Sandra's classes. Sandra gave short answers about the modified assignments. Peter talked about his chemistry teacher who kept making terrible jokes. I mentioned a project at work. Everything felt fragile, like we were all watching our words, afraid to say the wrong thing, afraid to break whatever small piece we had built. Then Peter made a dumb joke about his chemistry teacher trying to wrap the periodic table. Something about dropping bars of gold and silver. Sandra's mouth twitched. Then she laughed. A small, real laugh that sounded like her. Not the girl from the hospital, not the scared voice on the video monitor. Just Sandra laughing at her brother's stupid joke. The sound made my chest ache with hope, made my eyes burn. Natalie looked at me, and I saw the same feeling reflected there. Peter kept going, made another joke. Sandra laughed again. The conversation opened up a little, still careful, still fragile, but with small moments of normal, of family, of something that might heal if we were patient enough. We did not talk about Larry or the trial or the photos. We just ate pasta and listened to Peter's stories and let Sandra laugh when she could. After dinner, Sandra helped clear plates. A small, normal thing. She thanked me for cooking, then went to her room. But before she closed the door, she looked back and said, maybe we could do this again next week. I said yes, absolutely yes, anytime she wanted. That night I started keeping a journal like Sandra did, but mine was about learning to be present instead of perfect as a father. I bought a plain notebook, nothing fancy, just lined pages. I wrote about the therapy sessions I had started, the support group meetings, the small victories like Sandra's laugh at dinner. I wrote about the ongoing work of supporting her recovery without trying to fix everything, about accepting that healing was not linear, that some days would be better than others. That control was an illusion I needed to release. I wrote about the things I was learning, that showing up mattered more than having answers, that listening was more important than solving, that Sandra needed space to heal at her own pace, not mine. The journal helped me process things I could not say out loud, fears about the trial, worry about the photos still circulating, guilt about the past, hope about small moments of progress. I wrote about Peter too, how steady he had been, how Sandra trusted him in ways she could not trust me yet, how that was okay, how I was learning to accept help and share the load. Writing felt different from I expected, not like keeping a record, more like sorting through thoughts until they made sense, finding patterns, seeing growth even when it felt invisible day to day. I did not write every night, just when things felt too big to hold inside, when I needed to make sense of what was happening. The journal sat on my nightstand, a reminder that this process was ongoing, that recovery was work, that being present was a choice I made every day. Sandra texted me late that night. Her message came through just after 11. I was reading in bed, phone on the nightstand. The notification made my heart jump. Her text said no questions tonight, okay? Just thanks for staying. Maybe we can read together tomorrow? I stared at the words for a long moment, read them 3 times. She was thanking me, asking to spend time together, suggesting something normal like reading side by side. I typed back a simple response, always here, love you, then turned off my phone and set it aside. It was not forgiveness, not healing, not resolution, just a small step toward trust, an opening, a possibility. She was letting me back in, slowly, carefully, on her terms, and right now that was enough to build on. I lay in the dark thinking about tomorrow, about sitting with Sandra and reading, about being present without needing to fix anything, about the long road ahead and the small steps we were taking. The house was quiet, security system armed, cameras recording, Sandra safe in her room, Peter sleeping down the hall, everything fragile but holding together. I closed my eyes and let myself feel something like hope. That is where we will end for today. I am really glad you were here because it makes telling these stories so much more meaningful. I hope this one left you feeling calm and maybe a little inspired. Subscribe if you would like to join me for the next one.